South Africa united, Sportsworld looks at the history of black cricket in the Rainbow Nation. Breaking barriers, the Iranian women kayakers learning from the Americans. And we're on the road to 2010 to look at the difficulties of staging the FIFA World Cup in Africa. Welcome to Sportsworld, Al Jazeera's regular look at sport around the globe. I'm Joanna Gajrowska. Now, since the end of apartheid in South Africa, the issue of black participation in sport has been high on the agenda. Cricket has often been seen as an exclusively white sport. However, non-white cricket in South Africa has a much richer history than you may imagine. Sportsworld's Rahul Pathak explains.
Ever since the end of apartheid, South Africa's cricket team, like South African society, has tried to be truly representative. The process has had its problems as well as successes, most notably Mackay Ntini. In fact, he's the latest in a long line of black African cricketers that stretches back to the 1850s. Andre Odendaal has watched the development of black cricket from both sides of the fence. An Afrikaner, he was the first white first-class player to line up against black cricketers.
Under apartheid, with the exclusion of people from official life, people assumed that this was natural, that black people played soccer, that whites played rugby and cricket. But in fact, from the 1860s onwards, there was a tradition of mission school, Western-educated people in the mission schools getting a Victorian education, and obviously cricket was central to all that.
Professor Odendaal began playing in the 1970s, a particularly tough period for black cricket. Many members of the freedom struggle associated the game with the white establishment. Out of this period came Khaya Majola, a talented batsman and a member of the non-racial South African Cricket Board of Control. He spread the gospel of cricket in the black townships. Khaya died in 2000, but his brother continues to work for his dream of non-racial cricket.
Khaya was a gifted player. Khaya could have played with any player at the time and could have himself represented the country, but unfortunately was denied that right of representing his country. And therefore he wanted to put back into the country and show the world that there's a lot of other black talented cricketers that, if given opportunities, they can represent this country. So that was Khaya's passion.
However, 7 years after his death, the most famous symbol of township cricket finds itself in a sorry state. Soweto Cricket Club has hosted teams from all over the world, yet today the club is struggling to stay afloat.
I think more can be done, especially in terms of promoting the game within the townships. More can be done if they could put more of their resources into making the point that cricket becomes one of the major sports within the schooling systems, especially the black schooling system. Then that will actually make it more easier. And that means getting more guys to coach cricket within the schools, making it one of the sports, the main sports in the schools. Then it makes it eventually easier for us for everything to work out for us.
Today, South Africa uses a quota policy to get more young black and coloured players into the team. It's a policy that's been criticised by white South African-born players like Kevin Peterson, who claim they've been forced away as a consequence. But the player who most benefited from Peterson's departure says it was his ability and not his colour that made the difference.
He's been unfair to South Africa because he learned all his cricket over in South Africa, and he's just been a few years in England now. He calls himself an English. But I think there was a whole controversial thing behind that, because at that particular time I don't think Kevin was a batsman who could bowl. He was a bowler who could bat, and only when he went to England he worked on his batting and became one of the top players.
Nelson Mandela, the most famous symbol of the anti-apartheid struggle. Now, Mandela is actually a keen cricket fan, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to see more black and coloured players in the South African national team. But maybe it's the grassroots level that should receive more attention if black cricket in this country is to really flourish. Rahul Pathak, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
Now, in a perfect world, sport would be completely free of politics. The Olympic ideal has always been about letting athletes compete on the fields of play without concern for the stances of their governments. Sadly, though, politics does tend to encroach on sport, but as one group of intrepid teenagers from Iran recently proved, sport can simply be about the exchange of experiences, skills and fun. Al Jazeera's Brennan Connor reports.
Whitewater or slalom, canoeing and kayaking. It's certainly not for the faint of heart. With tumultuous trips down a river full of rapids, it is not only something daring fun seekers do on vacations, but also it's an Olympic sport, first seen in Munich in 1972 and now a regular part of the Summer Games since 1992. American athletes are among those who have dominated this sport at the Olympics, and in recent years many nations' programs are on the rise. But it's not likely you would associate slalom canoe kayaking with Iran, and given the outdoor nature of this sport, with female athletes from Iran. That is a perception Katayun Ashraf wants to change. She's a former national team member and now a coach for the Iranian team. She wanted to set up a developmental program in slalom canoe kayaking to make Iranian women more competitive. So she figured where better to learn how to do that than in the United States.
My primary aim was to learn techniques from trainers who come from great programs.
Searching through the internet, Katayun found a few different international organizations, and she finally met up with U.S. trainer Chris Wiegand. Together, they overcame the many hurdles, diplomatic, cultural, and financial, to set up this trip for her 3 teenage protégés. They traveled a long way to train in places like Boulder, Colorado, Charlotte, North Carolina, and at a special training facility outside Washington, D.C., all to be exposed to high-caliber athletes and to face many new challenges on the Whitewater Rapids. Challenges that Shodi, Roxana, and Camilla were not expecting from the start of their training.
The first day at Boulder, we looked at the rapids and the large water drops with wonder and fear. Then the trainer said, "Get into the water." We were like, "You want us to do what? Go into the water?"
But that was Katayun's idea for these girls, to have them test themselves by learning and gaining confidence in a sport that is tough to master. With the help of American trainer and 2-time Olympic medal winner Dana Schladek, the girls were put through their paces on the Potomac River outside Washington. There were cultural issues to deal with, like the Islamic Republic's dress code. Special wetsuits to cover the girls' bodies were provided by sponsors, along with other much-needed equipment, like helmets that could double as a hijab. And from the start, there were training issues as well.
I expected them to have 1 to 2 years of experience, and realizing that they did not, how do I personally, by myself, make these 3 girls capable in a month and a half time of those are 1 or 2 years of experience?
But slowly, enduring many frustrating and challenging attempts, these girls defied their fears.
I have learned to take on the rapids on my own, without having to count on anyone. Back home, when going down rapids, I always had help. I have to train. I have to learn what they have to teach.
And they eventually won over their coaches as well.
They're very enthusiastic. They're one of the more enthusiastic of the bunch. They seem to really want to get good in kayaking. These girls seem to have a real desire to improve and to move forward in the sport.
The Iranian girls improved to the point that they were invited to the U.S. National Whitewater Slalom Championships, where they competed against some of the best kayakers and surprised more than a few onlookers.
So the Iranian paddlers did enjoy their time here in the United States, and the cultural and personal experience it became will be one for a lifetime. They also acquired some much-needed expertise and confidence in their chosen sport. The trip was deemed a huge success, and everyone, it seemed, benefited. But all is not simple when it comes to relations between Iran and the United States, and when the girls returned home, there were ramifications.
One national newspaper story in Iran says Katayun and the young paddlers faced a hostile reception by members of the Iranian Canoe and Kayak Federation. And even with possible sanctions hanging over her and her young team, Katayun still believes this was a good idea all around.
The help we've gotten from the Americans, either kayakers or regular people, has been quite overwhelming. They love to share their knowledge. I really enjoyed this aspect. I learned that the American people can be friends with the Iranian people, and Iranian people likewise to the Americans.
Politics aside, it remains to be seen if this relationship, this exchange, this acquisition of skills and confidence will lead these young women to realize their dreams, to become Olympians, and to compete for their country. Brendan Connor, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, as ever, you can keep up to date with all the latest sports news on our website, aljazeera.net/English. Stay with Sportsworld though, because coming up after the break, the difficulties of hosting a World Cup. We're on the road to South Africa.